Hello, everyone, and welcome. I hope you guys are doing well this afternoon, are excited to listen, learn, and most importantly, ask about today's theme, SOC 2 versus ISO 27001. As many of you are aware, the information security landscape has both grown and become significantly more complex recently. Between managing tools, products, and policies, coupled with technology's knack for obsolescence, it's refreshing and easy to have an up-to-date guide to help you ensure both the breadth and depth of security is covered for your organization. This is where compliance frameworks like SOC and ISO 27001 help in a huge way. Not only are they both prevalent and available, but they can be customized and tailored to your organization's needs. Because of this, we've seen a tremendous interest, nearly like a 60% increase in both SOC 2 and ISO 27001 in the past 2 years. And both frameworks are quickly establishing themselves as the baseline compliance for security conscious organizations. To help take you through the nuances of this, I have enlisted the help of Tom McDonald from Net Compliance Solutions, our esteemed partner, and Aditya Uttapa, our Chief Cybersecurity Officer, to guide you through the journey associated with both frameworks. Before I hand it over to the two of them for introductions, I want to stress the importance of asking questions. We learn best and get the most out of being engaging, and we have two highly experienced security professionals to help you get the most out of this conversation. So without further ado, Aditya and Thomas, can you get us started?
Sure. This is Tom McDonald. I'm a partner at NCS, as Shalin said, and we work with Acorian. We're very close partners. We've worked successfully over the years. We cooperatively leverage each other's different areas of expertise in order to deliver an optimum security solution to our customers. I'm, as I said, a partner at NCS. Those of you who know Greg Ware, he is actually scheduled to be on. If he's not on yet, he'll be on at some point in the call as well. But I'm a partner at NCS. I've been in IT since the late 70s, too many years. And for the last 12 years now, exclusively in IT security. I've been designing, architecting, implementing IT security solutions for everything from SMBs up to Fortune 50 companies. So pretty comprehensive work done in this particular sector. Aditya, I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, good afternoon, all. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Aditya, Adi for short. I am the Chief Cybersecurity Officer at Acorian. We are a security strategy consulting firm, which enables SMBs and various tech-forward companies to meet various security requirements across compliance standards like SOC 2, ISO, high trust, HIPAA, etc., but also high trust assessors. A little bit about myself. I've spent much more than a decade in pure play security now. I started out as a pen tester, then moved quickly into the compliance space. I've been both an implementer and an auditor, and I've helped organizations comply with high trust, HIPAA, SOC 2, NIST, CSF, and ISO 27001. I'm excited to be on today's webinar and to share the platform with Tom, who I've worked very closely with over the last couple of years. And I hope that this webinar would be fruitful and help answer questions about these two compliance standards and whether they would be the right fit for you. So I'd like to pass it on to Tom, who would quickly talk about SOC 2 and ISO and why this golden question.
Sure. Thanks, Adi. And you'll see Adi and I are going to go back and forth. We like this to be as much of a conversation, real discussion as it can be. But so first of all, let's discuss, why are we even considering either of these standards? When as you can see on this slide here, when one looks at choosing a security standard and meeting security requirements, you've got a lot of candidates, right? And things come up like NIST, CSF, HIPAA, high trust, GDPR, CCPA. You can go on and on with those, right? But the two solutions we're talking about today, the ISO 27001 solution and the SOC 2 solution as well, these are comprehensive frameworks that one can put in place and then tweak the specifics of the compliance needs, such as high trust or GDPR, et cetera, in order to meet those. So all these other security definitions that we have listed here are often subsets of what you get in compliance for once you implement SOC or ISO. These that you're looking at here are really our requirements, often legal, in nature, that can be fulfilled within a successful implementation of either of these ISMS frameworks, because both of these are frameworks for information security management systems. So that's the key thing. They're both encompassing strategies that can be implemented across your entire organization and meet a number of various security requirements that you might be facing. Okay, that's the idea here. Now, which one of the two do you actually go for? We hear questions about this every day, right? I mean, this is an ongoing discussion that goes on and on. One ponders which one I should use. You come up with a question, and then another question cascades from that, and another one. You're going to be thinking about, this is what we'll be talking about in this presentation. We're going to be thinking about what drives the decision, right? Are there business vertical specific considerations that are demanding one or the other? Is my industry a deciding factor? And then whichever one of these I choose, how do the commitments look from my side? How much am I going to be investing in technology and in staffing and people? Right? And what it usually gets to, and this is the key thing, is that usually you're answering these questions, you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, is this even an IT decision, right? Isn't this an overall business decision? Do I go all the way to the board to make this decision? You'll see that it's not straight technical answers to this. So, and then how do I know I made the correct choice? So all of this we'll be talking about. But the idea is that in the end, whichever of these you choose, you're going to wind up with a security solution that's protecting your environment and that is meeting whatever compliance and business needs you might have, right? And this is going to be a lot of work on your part, a commitment to meeting these. It doesn't happen in a week, and it doesn't happen for $100, right? So there's serious commitments to be made. So you want to make the right choice. Why do I do this if it's so much work? What are the payoffs? Why is the security certificate so important? I'm going to pass that back to Adi to comment, on some of the things I just said, and to answer that and talk about some of the benefits that incur by implementing either of these solutions. Aditya?
Thanks, Tom. I think there were some great points that Tom just highlighted about how the SOC 2 or the ISO can be a great starter compliance standard to look at. While you look to, strengthen your security, it could be a great first step towards security compliance. And a point that I really liked, which is very important to understand, was, you can't do it for $100. You can't do it in a week, right? It's work, and it's all about securing your data and your client's data and being successful in that. So I'd like to quickly talk about why should an organization look at security certification, right? There could be multiple reasons, but it's 2021. Security certifications and credentials are table stakes, right? So whether you're an MSP or a SaaS provider, whether you're in the mail order business, everybody comes under some purview of security. We're all working to aid our customers be successful, and today we do get access to customer data. So it's very, very important that we help secure their data while securing our own IP and critical data. So it's table stakes for SaaS and MSPs and other companies to show some commitment to a security certification, the most popular ones being SOC 2 or ISO. Okay? Like I mentioned, it's also a customer or prospect request, typically because of the fact that you're getting access to their data. They're of course concerned about whether you'd be able to secure it and whether privacy can be maintained, right? This in turn helps build trust with your clients. They trust you more. It enables you to go after various different industries. It enables you to go showcase this credential when it's a requirement in an RFP or a contractual requirement, right? And lastly, this also enables you to continuously improve as an organization. Security is not an end goal; it's a journey. It's very, very important to understand that today's threat landscape is very dynamic. New threats emerge Also, today's IT stack is so dynamic, right? 5 years ago, you're on-prem. Today, you're on the cloud. Your data is everywhere. People are holding your data on mobile phones. It's on endpoints. It's on the cloud. It's all over, right? So it's important to understand that risk, continuously improve, continuously, make your security program more robust and strengthen it so that you safeguard yourselves against possible, breaches. So I'd like to quickly go on to, what are some of the areas where, these two standards collide. Tom and I would quickly want to give you a little intro into what is the ISO 27001 and SOC 2. So I'm going to let Tom quickly introduce ISO 27001 so that you have a little bit of a base before which we deep dive into what are the things that you should be considering.
Okay, thanks, Adi. Yeah, so I'll take the ISO side of this. And, this number one here states exactly what it is, what this does. This focuses on an organization who want to put in place an operational information security management system, an ISMS, right? To manage the entire InfoSec program, not just today, but on an ongoing basis, right? And that ISMS is regularly reviewed for conformity to the ISO 27001 standard. So you put it in place, and then it regularly gets reviewed. Now, the thing about this that we should state up front is, unlike what happens with SOC 2 sometimes, and Adi will talk about this, there's no regulatory requirement. There's no law that anywhere says you've got to have ISO 27001 certification, right? This is about putting a framework in place to meet whatever type of compliance is necessary to keep your business going, right? Internationally accepted. Right, so this is, the International Standard Organization was developed right after World War II, I think. It's in Geneva. Last count, there was 160 something customers that, countries that participate in the standard. So if you're looking for a solution that travels, that you're doing a lot of work in a lot of different countries, this might be something that's you'd be interested in doing. The accreditation, it says a recognized ISO accredited registrar. All that means is that whoever comes to actually do the audit and actually gives you the actual certification is someone who's been licensed for that and has credentials that they can show you. This isn't an in-house audit you can do and just make a checkbox to it. We'll talk about the same security controls, but really they're both very comprehensive in this. We'll talk about the list of security controls. I think there's in ISO, it's 110, 114 or something like that, specific controls that are defined. It's very similar in SOC 2. It says certification valid for 3 years. The way certification takes place is that there is a time of which there's the first audit which takes place. So we do the audit, and it's a full audit of the entire environment, and you're going to get certified against that. And then in subsequent years, in years 2 and 3, there's a limited audit which takes place called a type 2 audit, but there's a limited audit which takes place, which typically an auditor is going to come in and he's going to test, areas in like maybe a third of your environment. And then once that 3-year cycle is up, it begins again. You've got to do a complete audit and then the partial ones as one goes about it. Okay. Implementation time, I probably should have mentioned in 5 because I just thought of that as as we're doing the audit. We're going to talk more about implementation time, but it's anywhere from Adi's got in here 4 to 8 months. It depends, of course, on where you're starting with and what resources you have. Maybe you've got firewalls in place, but you don't have IDSs. You don't have any multi-factor authentication. You've never done quarterly penetration testing, all that things. You can see that the time to implementation will be longer than someone that already has a pretty robust system in place. As I said, we'll talk more about that as we go along. And also how much you engage a third party to help you to get ready for the audit will affect the time from beginning to end. The applicability of controls is essentially you define the areas of your business that are key, that you're implementing these security controls on, that are necessary for you to do the business. And it also, the ability, what areas you want to spotlight. We'll talk about spotlighting some areas before. For instance, if you're a company that stores, information for your customers in the cloud, obviously you're going to want to spotlight, you want to have controls to spotlight what's my cloud security like, things like that. So there's flexibility built into this. And that sort of goes with the number 9 there. ISO 27001 is part of the 27XXX framework, right? 27001 is going to define only a framework. It's going to go through various areas and tell you, somewhere I've got my ISO list here somewhere, but essentially you do asset management, access control, communication security, physical security, cryptography, supplier management, all these general topics. But it's not telling you the specific controls have to be in place for each one of those. The controls are defined in a separate document. So again, you have flexibility with this framework. You put the framework in place and you can choose to use the ISO 27002 set of standard controls and put those in place, but you don't have to. You could go use NIST, the 853 or the NIST CSF controls. You could, put those in place as well. So you've got a framework with built-in flexibility for you down there. It's very good. And as we said, single certification and audit, which takes place year 1, and then shorter ones in year 2 and 3. But that's, pretty much the thing to keep in place. It's a big framework. It's flexible. Implementation time is going to vary. We'll talk more about that as we go along. And there's a very specifically defined way to get certified and to maintain your certification from this. Adi.
Yeah. So moving on to SOC 2. So most often I get asked this question a lot. Are ISO 27001 and SOC 2 similar? Yes and no, right? There are parts where it's similar. 96% of the controls map perfectly between the two. But I'd like to reiterate the fact that just like any other security credential, certification, or attestation, it's all about securing data. The SOC 2, which is a standard, it's something that is an auditing procedure that was developed by the AICPA. Essentially focuses on how's customer data protected, right? And that's their main premise of what they assess. It is assessed by third-party CPAs. It is very prevalent in North America, so it's fast becoming a gold standard for assessing whether an MSP, a SaaS company, the likes of them are truly secure, and it's becoming a well-accepted credential across various large companies while selecting vendors, right? The implementation, like Tom said, it could vary, but typically, if you have help, you've got some kind of framework in place, you have some implementation. The implementation would be very similar to ISO. It could basically take about 4 to 8 months. The evidence collection is very, very similar to ISO, very similar controls. Like Tom mentioned, again, the SOC 2 is an auditing procedure, and you have the COSO framework to look at, while you're looking at what kind of controls to implement. But it's up to the organization to understand how do they want to meet a particular, requirement or a common criteria in the SOC 2. So common criteria could be whether the management focuses on information security. So you need to showcase what kind of controls do you have in order to meet that particular requirement. So it is a little bit, open-ended, but yet the SOC 2 is very robust. It enables organizations to think and implement controls that would then further go on to meet that particular requirement, right? It completely depends on the TSCs or the trust service criteria. So if you're a SaaS company or an MSP, which is very, very important and has critical client data, for you confidentiality is most important. So security is of course a TSC that has to be covered, but the confidentiality is something that if it needs to be covered, if you have client data, then that's something you have to consider. So these are questions that one asks. We're not going to detail a lot about how do you scope SOC 2s, but you could basically, the number of controls or requirements that are applicable to you could vary from about 100 to about 200 to 30, based on the TSCs that you select. This is, of course, an auditing procedure, and there are 2 types of audits. It's a type 1 and a type 2. I'm going to dive deeper into what does a type 1 or type 2 do. But before that, I'd like to quickly jump into the next section, which is all about what do you consider when you're looking to meet any of these two requirements, and how do you get the answer? Should I go the ISO way or should I go the SOC 2 way? So, all right. So the first criteria or the first question that one should be asking themselves is, what is your main driver? What's your main motivator? And what kind of applicability can this particular credential have, right? The first and foremost thing, which is a big driver for looking at a standard, looking to get certified or attested, is to frankly improve your overall security posture. The whole fact that you go down this entire journey, you write up your policy procedures, you have your controls in place, you implement them, you have maturity in them, you have some measurement and management principles associated to controls, directly and indirectly improves your security posture. So this just makes you a little more resilient and makes your data a lot more secure, right? But there are other motivators, right? So it's very, very important that if you're looking down, at whether you should go down the ISO or the SOC 2 journey, it's important to understand, what are your contracts calling out? What are your clients asking you for, right? Are you being mandated to meet a particular credential as part of your third-party due diligence, that their client has put forth, right? So that's important to understand that. It's also becoming a sales and marketing instrument where you're essentially, by having this credential, you're taking the issue off the table, whether you're actually secure, whether you handle client data securely, right? And lastly, it's a great way to reduce your vendor risk assessments. Today, organizations have a lot of vendor risk, compliance burden. They often get numerous different questionnaires on a daily basis that have to be answered. So the simple fact that you're already attested or certified by a third party can reduce a lot of that load, and can allow CISOs or CTOs or tech leaders to really focus on the things that really matter to the business, right? But there's another very, very important criteria, and Tom and I have often discussed this, and we've often when we've worked with various organizations, seen that what's the final decision, or who's the final decision maker. So I'm going to let Tom quickly just give his 2 cents on how does one decide, or who makes the final decision.
Yeah, I think you made a lot of really good points there, because who makes the decision really means, who should be in the discussion. And if you go back and look at those drivers you just talked about, the driver being improve overall security posture, which is sort of a proactive driver, or right up front, taking the question off the table when you get into contractual discussions, which is proactive, or whether it's a reactive one where the sales force is coming to you and say, hey, I've got to sign this contract and look what's in it, right? When you look at that, that sort of dictates who has to be in the discussion, right? And I think this very quickly moves from me as an IT professional going from, my usual manner is, okay, I've got to do boundary protection, right? So which firewalls do I put in place? And I make a spreadsheet, vendor 1, vendor 2, attributes, features, costs, bingo. I give everything a score and I come up with a number. Objectively look at it, I pick the right tool. That's not what this is, right? This is a business discussion, right? Because you're going to, first of all, you're going to be asking for budget for this, right, to do it. And then you want to make sure, remember we said, how do I know I picked the right choice when you're done? You want to make sure you're satisfying whatever the needs of the business are, right? So if it is sales and marketing driving this, as opposed to just a compliance officer driving it, you want to make sure that those people are involved in the discussion and those people help you make the choice. As I mentioned briefly earlier on, I've been in cases where the board gets involved, right? Because it's a decision which has to be made at that level. So, for me, one of the big takeaways when I think about this, when I go through this, is, what, this is not an IT-only decision. That's a key thing to realize. This is a business decision, and I've got to get other folks involved in this right early up and right at the beginning.
Absolutely. I think that's what experience has taught us. It's always important to have everybody in the room and, make this decision collectively. All right. I'd like to quickly, talk about how does one really decide. Another great consideration is, what's your industry focus, right? Now, if your target demographic is, to work with SaaS companies, right? Look at what are the credentials that's most popular with them, right? Or what are the credentials, security certifications that they are asking their vendors to comply. So maybe you're being asked for SOC 2s because they in turn are being asked to, showcase SOC 2 compliance by their end customers. So it has a trickle down, effect. So the target demographic of your client, which industries they work in makes a huge difference. Another big criteria is which geographies do they work with. Tom mentioned that, the ISO 27001, it travels, right? So it's across the world. If you're working, or you want to work with organizations that, are, non North America, or they have other presence across the world, then an ISO might be, a better choice as compared to a SOC 2, because a SOC 2 is more prevalent in North America, right? Lastly, I think, size of your target demographic, how big or small they are, and what kind of clients do they have. All of these criteria typically, boil down to what is your industry focus and what should you be considering, right? So now that we've actually spoken about how do you essentially understand which ones, work for you, in the first three considerations, it's all about now understanding how easy or difficult is it, and what kind of, sweat equity do you have to put in to comply with some of these, credentials. So I'm going to hand it off to Tom, who's going to give you a little introduction into some of the investments that one has to make.
Sorry, it took me a minute to get off mute there. Yeah, what is this going to cost? There's your investment for your own investment in technology, in-house sources, and then if you're going to engage, well, you're going to have to engage an auditor. If you're going to engage a consulting company to help you get prepared, I'll let Audie discuss the auditing and consultant costs, and I'm just going to talk about, you in-house here. Because, you can just look at this, right? First of all, you got to get, well, before you do anything, you've got to get management buy-in and support, right? Now, you're going to have to invest in hours you're going to have a tech lead, a program manager. You'll find that when we look at the implementation points that have to be done, you're going to see, oh, this isn't one guy, right? There's going to be a team, there's different areas of expertise which are necessary. And then there's going to be a number of tools that, you're going to use tools in scoping the thing out to figure out, where you have to go. And then you're going to have to buy technology probably, and implement technology tools. So there's costs associated with that, such as putting in AV or multi-factor authentication or security monitoring tools, all of those when we talk about the tools for technology. And then security awareness nowadays, since we know most of the attacks are our end users, when people come in and do the certs, they're just as interested in how smart your end users have been made about this new security framework you've put in place. So there's the whole cost of security awareness and training your employees, your teams. And then there's the cost of, what is your appetite for how often you want to have this thing checked and re-audit? What is your appetite for how frequently you want to be doing the security testing? Do I want quarterly pen tests? Do I want monthly, et cetera? All that has to be decided when you build this thing. So if I'm, trying to plan this thing out, and I'm thinking, how much is it going to cost me? I'm not going to be able to figure this thing out unless I have a project plan in front of me, right? So if I do engage, when I do engage with maybe a consultant who's going to help me roll this thing out, make sure that they've got a professionally defined project plan. I can look at it beforehand and I can see, okay, I need, this expertise with this many hours here, this many here. And then you can go through and calculate. That's the only way you really can go through and calculate the fixed costs and the repeated costs, right? There'll be fixed costs, there'll be one-offs, you pay for the auditor, you put a lock on a trash bin that's got, that you put the paper in that wasn't there before, one-time cost. And then there's the repeating cost of, the quarterly penetration tests, as I said. So there's a lot of in-house cost. The way to get a good handle on it is to have an idea of what the rollout plan looks like, and then you can go through and build the cost against each step that's in there. And Adi, I'll let you talk about how a consultancy agent, how the auditor fits into the solution, costs associated with that.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I see Tom has raised a very important point about internal investments. Folks, when they write up their entire security budget, of course, look at, how much is my CPA going to cost? How much is the ISO registrar going to cost for the audit, etc. But they often forget how important it is to budget for your internal effort. How many hours do you have to put in? Do you have to have the right kind of leadership internally? What kind of tools, etc. So external costs, while important, internal investments are equally important and something that definitely has to be accounted for. So Tom did raise a very, very important aspect. But coming to the real dollar investments from an external standpoint, you could typically do it yourself. It's quite popular, but another way to fast track and really understand how can you comply with these standards is to work with an implementation partner who takes you along the way. So everything from scoping to policy procedure development, gap assessment, implementation support or advisory or pre-audits, all of that stuff. You have somebody to work with who's going to take you along the way and has a lot of significant experience. An implementation support partner, while being an added expense, can be a great investment for an organization that's trying to comply this either on a very short timeline or doesn't have the security expertise internally to drive a security program of this nature. Right? Next is, it's all about implementation. Somebody has to come in and implement your MDM, your AV, your security monitoring. So accounting and budgeting for an implementation partner in case you don't have that expertise internally, right? So some of the tools, like Tom mentioned, they would range from an endpoint security solution to a SIM or a security monitoring solution or encryption solutions, right? There's one investment that organizations need to definitely focus on, and that's something that is what I call as a hack. How do you typically ensure that you could reduce your compliance burden or scope? The best way to do that is to move to a compliant hosting provider or use a third party who's already got that credential. That just allows you to inherit that security control and manage that security better, right? So this in turn can reduce your security burden or compliance burden drastically, and something that organizations definitely need to start looking at while going down this path, right? Now, we've gone through investments really quickly, internal, external, now it's all about how do you understand what are timelines? And I spoke about, how do you hack your way through the timelines, but Tom's going to give you a little 101 on timelines, how long do these things take, and talk about that.
Yeah, Adi, I think, we do have that slide later on when we go through the plan. It probably is best to just, given our time right now, maybe we'll just discuss timelines there. But the idea is that, as Adi stated before, if you outsource some of this stuff, with existing expertise, then you're going to cut down on your timeline. You spend a few dollars there, but you save dollars in other places. So let me just go on to we'll discuss more about that on the other slide. But let's go to the next one with the third-party risk, right? Understanding third-party risk, because this is something people often forget about. I've got this in-house. Well, I send my data out here to a third party. I trust them, right? Well, remember the Target, that famous Target breach, right? Target store. That was their HVAC vendor, right? And who took the hit, right? The HVAC vendor. They probably took some hit. I don't know, but Target, they took the major hit there, millions and millions of dollars worth in lost business there. So it's very important to consider a third-party risk. So and this goes both ways, right? So you might be thinking, well, I provide third-party services for my customers. Hey, that's why I'm doing this, right? Okay, so my customers will feel secure that they know that the service I'm providing them has got this check mark and they're happy. But it works the other way, right? What if you have a third-party provider who's got your data in a cloud or something like that, right? For instance, when I do audit, I do a lot of I was doing a lot of PCI audits. When I do a PCI audit, I come to, hey, this data is in scope of the audit and you don't maintain it, you send it out to this third party. Now, if the auditee can give me a certificate that says, hey, here's company B who has my data, here's their ISO cert, or here's their SOC 2 cert, we're done. Checkbox, we go on to the next thing. If they don't give me that cert, then it's like, okay, we've got to resolve this. If we don't resolve it, the audit fails, right? So think of yourself as a third party and what it means to your customers and the importance in their audits. And also think about the third parties you have for when you come and get audited. So third party is the key consideration. Aditya.
Yeah. So all about how do you fast track this, right? That's another big consideration. If you have a, if you're on a deadline, you're on the clock, your clients have asked you to showcase compliance, then it's all about how do you get there the fastest way. Both ISO and SOC 2 have their advantages in how they look at inheritance of security controls from third parties. But it's very, very important to understand that little aspect because it could save you a lot of time. Second is how can you effectively carve out your scope, right? So you could either go ahead and protect the entire Yankee Stadium, or you could only go and protect the diamond. That's most important, right? In this scenario, it's important to effectively understand what your scope should be, what are your clients really asking you for, and then rather than trying to boil the entire ocean, take one piece at a time. Comply your most important workflow first, and then you can build over time. So look at the credential that allows you to do so before making that decision, right? And lastly, like Tom and I have been telling all about leveraging certified and attested third parties to essentially get you through the entire thing, and looking at an implementation partner who can take you through the entire journey, whether it's scoping, gap assessment, policy, procedure, dev. All of that could reduce a lot of time and effort at your end while meeting those stringent timelines, right? So at this point, I'm going to quickly just go over to what is our overall approach and how should an organization look at implementation, right? So this is a tried and tested methodology. We basically take all our customers through this entire implementation approach. And I'm going to quickly talk about it, as to why is it important to look at each phase separately. So there are about 4 different phases. Phase 1 is all about understanding your organization and your scoping. So you understand your organization by first, where are your most critical data locations, right? Who are your most risky, assets, or which ones are they, right? What is the scope that is clients are asking for that have to be, that need to meet compliance requirements. So understanding, how big or small your scope should be, what should it include, all of that goes into understanding the scope so that you have a razor focused approach to compliance. Next is define your security policy. It's like they say, you need to have a plan in order to meet a particular goal, right? So write up your high level plans of how your security policy should be, what all the things that you want to have as part of your security policy. This is a great way to get started. Then understand what are your most critical assets, what are the criticalities, and then do a gap assessment. A gap assessment can be, either a happy assessment or could be a rude shock because you really understand, what are the things that are missing in your organization and what really need to be complied or need to be implemented so that you start looking at, you start looking in better shape. Then it's all about conducting a risk assessment, understanding what is your risk appetite, creating a security organization internally so that you could drive some of these initiatives. Once all of that is done, then it comes down to writing up your security framework in the form of policy procedures. These are essentially like marching orders for the entire team, right? Which calls out your security goals. It basically covers all the various domains across ISO and SOC 2. So it could be change management, it could be physical security, it could be security awareness, ensuring that these policies and procedures are robust, have enough content in them that basically represents your current ideal state in the truest sense possible, right? Once the gap assessment, once you've written up your policy procedure, it's all about going and implementing those gaps so that you're closer to meeting your certification status. So it's you remediate those gaps, You select what kind of tools do you want, whether it's security awareness, whether you go with vendor A or B, whether it's security monitoring, you go with vendor A or B. It's all about understanding which solution works for you, for your size of the organization. And a lot of implementation partners here really come through because they are the right advocates to help you understand, how can you remediate some of these gaps. Then you go ahead with training and awareness. Also, that entire piece about once you've implemented all of these controls and gaps, it's very, very important to understand whether they've effectively been implemented. So you don't want antivirus to be, rolled out across the board, but then forget that one endpoint, which is, of a contractor who has complete access to your data, but he's an independent contractor. So it's on you to ensure that, even he has antivirus or he or she has antivirus. So ensuring that it's actually rolled out across the organization is another thing. And then a very, very important step is to conduct a pre-audit, ensure that somebody goes in independently, looks at whether you're actually meeting the requirement or not, and then go in for your certification audit, the type 1 or type 2, and then sustain security, right? So now that I've spoken about the approach really, really quickly, Tom's going to give you a little 101 on what kind of timelines are we talking? How long do these things take?
Yeah, how long does it take? Is, one of my customers says, well, it looks like it's going to take between 2 weeks and infinity. And, that's how this works. So we can see the various stages here. Now, prepare, as you can see, we've got there 2 to 6 months, right? That is the time. Everything Adi just showed you on the last page, just about everything there, that's prepare, right? 90% of that was prepare. So this is the most consuming work, and that takes up all the time. And, we talked before about building a plan, knowing what your investment is. But, as you're figuring out the prepare, you should know, okay, this is going to be in my investment. These are the folks that I need involved. This is how much I'm outsourcing. This is how much I'm doing myself, right? How much is do it yourself? How much is you're going to get assistance with? All this will help you do the type of work, because you can see there the items listed there: create, update the policies, identify, remediate gaps. Identify and remediate gaps is one bullet thing there, but that is everything from, I've got to have log monitoring in place and I don't have it in place. That's a lot of work. Or I have to have an IDS and I don't have a smart firewall. Or, I have to have multi-factor authentication. All of that falls into that one thing. So again, as I said way back at the beginning, this time is going to depend on where you started from. How fit are you right now as far as security goes? And then as you're calculating the time, figuring out, you can pick and choose what I want an outside expertise to provide to me. You could say, okay, I got to do log monitoring. I want someone to come in, help me pick a SIM, a SIM vendor, and then help me set up a log management center, right? But the documentation I have to do, create, update policies and procedures, I'm going to do that in-house. You can pick and choose and build a plan and get a good idea of how long, this particular step might take you. Then the pre-audit, and the pre-audit is very clearly the work you do. Essentially, you do an audit like you think an auditor would, because you don't want the auditor to come in and find something, right, to stop the audit. So, and then for ISO 27001, it's called an internal audit, and it's a mandatory step. The internal audit has to be done. The first thing an auditor is going to say to you when they get there, whether it's, well, if it's an auditor who's worth their salt, whether it's ISO or whether it's SOC 2, is, hey, let me see the results of the internal audit or the pre-audit, right? So you've got to have those. One thing to consider, by the way, is that internal work cannot be done by someone in your business who is related to the IT security team. So in a case like that, you might want to outsource, or if you have a compliance department, which is separate from security, they could do it. But there's the pre-audit that takes place. And then the certification, now Adi's got up there 6 months, for SOC certification. That's because there's a time delay between the type 1 and the type 2 to see the maturation of the controls and come back in and check they're in. There's not that much of a time. In SOC 1 and SOC 2, you can actually do it weeks apart. You can get certified within a month of the initial certification. But as we mentioned before, there's the initial certification, and then there's the follow-up certifications there's the initial audit and follow-up audits to which take place that lead you to the final certification. And that's probably enough. Now we can move on to some nuggets from experience, Adi, unless you want to comment more on the life cycle. But I'm looking at our time here.
Yeah. Yeah, I know we're getting close to completion, but I'd like to quickly talk about, you know, I I think from a life cycle standpoint, it's important to realistically understand how long do these things take, right? There are a lot of organizations, Tom, of course, did mention early on, can you do it in a couple of days? No way, right? It's a lot of work, and you have to do it the right way. This would take significant amount of time, and you know, ISO, of course, once you have your implementation in place, you have a policy procedure in place, you can go for certification. With the SOC 2, you can go for a type 1 once you have policy procedure and implementation in place, but then you need to have at least 6 to 9 months of maturity before you go for the type 2, right? And the type 2 is the one that's most often, requested for by, third parties. That's one thing I'd like to just, highlight there before I go to some nuggets from experience. So, things that we've learned and seen across, and for every time that I've seen this across the various customers, if I'd save $1, then I'd be a millionaire. I'm just kidding. But frankly speaking, lack of stakeholder buy-in, right? That's a big one, right? Your management has to be on board with it. They have to be telling you, what should be the scope, what is it the customers are asking for. Maybe you just have to certify a workflow. Maybe you just have to certify your AWS instance rather than the entire organization. Understanding that. Secondly, having the buy-in wherein they're checking up, giving you an necessary budget, understanding timelines, having that conversation with management to tell them that a software cannot be done in a month, right? So you need essentially a couple of months. So sitting down, having that conversation, setting expectations is important. Next is all about insufficient communication, right? Whether it's policy procedure, whether it's expectations, whether it's telling employees about, what are the new SOPs. Uh, and another point that I, called out earlier was about scope. Maybe you're trying to certify everything under the sun. Maybe it's very, very important that you understand what scope should you have, right? A very, very common, area of failure is also the fact that organizations fail to perform a pre-audit. And this is basically the last phase in which you can identify the gaps, right? Before you go in for a certification audit or an attestation, which is where an auditor comes in and, they point blank about the gaps, and, you typically, whether you pass or fail. So this is the last place where you can catch some of those, some of those issues. And then you have other things associated to significant control failures. You might have thought that you've rolled out something and it's working effectively fine. Maybe you thought that your MDM is across all the endpoints, but you've forgotten a couple of endpoints and they turn out to be critical. Or your CEO is also on leave, right? You are unable to push the MDM into their, endpoint. So these are, other areas where, controls could fail, lack of internal control monitoring. And I typically just go back to, what happened at Capital One. Organizations, as soon as somebody leaves, you have to offboard them, you have to revoke access, you have a great SOP document, but if it's not being done, just like what happened at Capital One, where a contractor's access was never disabled, and that led to complete compromise of the S3, right? And then having inadequate evidence and the likes of that. So these are a couple of things that we've seen across experience, and we've seen organizations falter and struggle with these. So it's very, very important that organizations understand that these things are covered. Next, I'd like to quickly talk about. I'd like for Tom to quickly talk about how do you find the right partner on your compliance journey?
Yeah, sure. Well, obviously you want someone with experience and reputation, right? I mean, you want someone who's got referenceable, accounts that have done stuff and they've been doing this for a while and you want to see results. But I think the most important bullet on this is projected plan of action, that next one, because what you want from whoever you might engage with, what you want is a detailed project plan, right? This should be a spreadsheet with each of the steps and each of the steps in the plan and assignment, who's assigned it, how long they expect it to take. You should be able to see very clearly exactly what this assistant is going to be providing to you, because without that, you might know what you're paying them, but without that project plan, you won't know what the gaps are, what they expect you to be doing. So when you're figuring cost, you're figuring what it's going to cost me for them, and you figure out what it's going to cost me for me, right? So unless they can deliver you a very good project plan, which is specific that you can understand and read, know where you fit in, then you really can't figure out what it's going to cost you. So make sure you get that. Outcomes and key results, make sure, of course, you understand the deliverables. One key thing is, are you just going to help me prep this thing, do all the preparation, or are you also going to do the pre-audit? And are you going to be with me during the actual audit? Are you going to be there to hold my hand during the audit? Because let's face it, if you hire someone who's done some of the key prep work and a question comes up about that in the audit, you really want the person there to do that. So make sure you're clear about the scope of the service you're getting and the deliverable. And of course, if you want to see case studies, that's all, the rest of this stuff is pretty much, boilerplate, what you'd see in finding a right partner. And of course, the cost should be within your budget, but it should also be flexible pricing. Don't ever forget you're the customer. You should get it how you want. Right? So, yeah.
Yeah,
Patty,
no, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think those are great points there as to whether it's finding an implementation partner or your auditor. I think Tom's raised some very, very important points. You need to exactly know what are you getting as part of it and what's length and breadth. So those are some great points. So thank you, Tom, for sharing those insights. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to all of you. We're going to quickly go into the Q&A section, and the floor is open for questions to Tom and I.
Hi, so I'm going to pop back in here and at least go over the questions that I have. With the compliance solutions like Vanta, Tugboat, Secure Frame, the other ones out there, how does the security consultant really fit in and add value that differentiates them from these online solutions or portals?
Yeah, so I think 2020 was an year when we saw a lot of these vendors and GRC platforms really emerge and talk about how these solutions could possibly help you meet with compliance. Now, at the end of the day, their platforms, they are they can be used as a collaborative tool, they can be used as a storage tool, but a lot of these tools do provide boilerplates for policy procedure, but somebody has to go in and do the end work, right? You need somebody at your end to take on this responsibility, whether it's outsourced or whether you have an internal PM, a security lead who's doing this groundwork, right? And enabling you to meet compliance and to have necessary security. So you can have the flashiest of tools, but you don't have the right folks to leverage it. You're not going to get real value.
Yeah,
so a lot of these tools. Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
I was going to say, yeah. I mean, as you said, these are great platforms, but GRC is asking you to do risk management, compliance management, policy management, third-party management, right? All the things we've been talking about. That isn't done in the tool, right? You've got to actually do that work, and that's why some people often refer to SOC or ISO as as the starting point for a successful GRC system, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So the next question that I've had is, so I've heard SOC 2 is a broad certification, but what does that mean? Is there something that I'm certifying against?
Okay, so I call it a myth. So the SOC 2s aren't a certification; they're an attestation to begin with, right? They are basically the opinion of a third-party independent CPA when he or she comes in and looks at your controls and certifies whether you meet the necessary security requirements or not, right? The SOC 2 is based on the COSO framework. It basically gives you a list of broad requirements or areas that you need to have in place, but then you design your controls to meet those particular broad requirements. So it could be a requirement such as the management has oversight into the security program. Now, this could be multiple things. It could be a weekly steering committee meeting. It could be the fact that the management comes under management is part of the scoping discussion. It could also mean that the management maintains MIS reporting for security as well. So it could mean multiple things, right? So it's all about how do you design your controls to meet that broad requirement. that COSO's put forth. So yes, it can be a little open-ended, but yet it's all about, how do you design your controls and how do you decide what you need to have in place, right? Unlike the ISO where, you have your list of requirements and you know exactly what needs to be done, right? Tom's thoughts on that?
No, you well stated. Nothing to add there.
Sorry about that. I was having some difficulties, but I'm back. The other question is kind of for budget and preparation. So one of the folks asked, our budget is set for this year, but we want to get to a SOC 2 at some point next year. Are there any steps that can be taken to make that an easier push, or is there something I can do to prepare for the process and maybe make the implementation burden easier, I guess is a way to phrase it?
Well, when both Adi and I said that, the time to implementation varies, and most of it depends on where you start, right? So, what I would do in a situation like that, I would just, get a list of look at the major controls that I know have to be in place, whichever framework I pick, and just see, do I have most of those met, right? We used examples earlier of multi-factor authentication, security monitoring, quarterly pen testing. I would look at what big ones I don't have and know that by implementing these things now, maybe I've got some, enough budget to implement certain things. I'm bringing myself to a better level of security. I'm helping my company today to protect itself, and I'm getting closer to where I have to be when I actually do the full implementation of whatever framework I choose.
Tom raised actually a very interesting point, and I've seen the emergence of this. Customers today proactively budget for which credentials they want to achieve, and it's often a thing about budget, and they're looking at it next year. But a lot of customers that we have seen have done a quick 30,000 feet review, just like Tom mentioned. What are the broad areas that I don't have, right? Or they engage with implementation partners or organizations like ourselves to just do a quick readiness audit. It's basically a couple of hours. You, on a high level, understand what are the things that are missed and what are the major things that I have to focus on. So that's a great point that Tom made. Understand your major gaps first and start budgeting for it early on, so that there are no last minute surprises, so that you don't overrun it, by 3x.
Thank you. And the last one, I think, kind of goes hand in hand with the budget. But is there a specific time period that I have to start and finish a SOC 2 or an ISO 27000 by? Or can I do this can I take my time with it, really, and implement as necessary? But I think you guys just partially answered that. But if you want to drive it home.
Yeah, I know the source of this question. So typically, HITRUST has an audit window. They need you to, once you start your certification, you have over 90 days to get it, closed out. But unlike the SOC 2 ISO, it all depends on your internal timelines. You decide how long you need to take to implement. You base it off, what your customers are asking for, and that's the primary objective. Your audit timelines are anyways defined by your auditors, and it's not more than a couple of days in both cases. And so that's something that we have seen from experience.
Yeah, we got a comment from Rich Jones here on the comment thing. Said, sounds like a self-audit of current controls and attestation evidence collected as part of standard operating procedures is a great starting point. Exactly. That's
absolutely
exactly what
yeah.
we're saying. Yeah.
Okay. That is all of the questions that I currently have. But if there are more questions, please feel free to email Greg, Aditya, Tom, Greg, whose email is right here, and we will be more than happy to get on a call with you or answer your emails as they come in. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time. I hope this was very informative for you. And Adi and Tom, you guys are more than welcome to wrap up.
No, thank you for the time today.
I'm sorry, there's one last question that I'm seeing. Are you folks seeing playbooks being generated for, say, evidence we should collect on Azure? Absolutely. So, as that's a great question. How do you essentially take all of this, control and information of third parties and relay it into your compliance program, right? So, yes, there are things like, your configurations of your virtual machines on Azure, or if it's configuration of the platform itself. A lot of that information can be taken in, and they're not playbooks as such, but we of course have a list of things that organizations should be looking at from a control standpoint, while assessing whether their CFP is doing what's required, right? Okay. There's also a follow-on comment about, um, if you don't meet these standards, we will not pay ransom claims. That's a great point. Uh, Insurance companies have different premiums for organizations that have security credentials or certifications as compared to the other ones, and that's a great point. I mean, this is a real life problem, and insurance companies have started to move away from the fact that they're no more supporting ransom claims if you don't have your necessary security in place. So Tom, from experience, what do you think? I mean, this because of this new practice, do you think organizations are going to look at security a little more diligently?
Well, I mean, we're already seeing insurance rates go crazy, right? We're already seeing people respond to that. I mean, let's face it, the insurance companies really weren't very good at this beginning. They put a stake in the ground. They really didn't know how much they were investing and how much they would get burned. And we see a lot of discussion about insurance companies, I shouldn't be paying, companies saying I should. And yes, rates are affected now based on what type of certification you have. So all of this plays in. And the previous question about Azure, I mean, that's a whole other discussion about how do these compliance play into these specialized environments like Azure, AWS, and you're right, there's special checklists which live with those as they become part of the scope. So we've got two more presentations we can build out of these two questions, Adi. So
Absolutely, I know it's a conversation that can go on for a very long time, but thank you all for your time. Tom, thank you for your insights and experience. And yeah, we're looking forward to hearing from all of you with your queries and any questions that you might have in the future.
cheers, thank you.
Take care. Bye.